All Airmic members tuning in to today's Airmic Academy. Ironically, being presented to you in a virtual way. Ironic because the session is 360 communication powered by technology. So I guess we're putting our money where our mouths are. So thanks for joining at these challenging times. Ventiv Technology is a close partner of Airmic and well poised, we think, to talk about communicating matters relating to risk and insurance using technology. Questions will be handled at the end. So shortly I'll hand over to our hosts today, our presenters. And let me just quickly introduce them to you. So firstly, I'm Patrick, the principal of the Airmic Academy, for those of you who don't know me. So the presentation will be delivered by David Thomas, and David is the commercial director of Ventiv EMEA, and is responsible for business development and the ongoing commercial relationship with Ventiv's major clients. David has worked in the risk and insurance industry for 25 years, and he started out as an underwriter in the London market and followed 10 years as a risk and insurance manager for a FTSE 100 conglomerate, so very much like an Airmic member. I think he was an Airmic member at the time. And David then moved into the technology sector and has almost 20 years experience in providing bespoke solutions to the corporate risk and insurance industry. And David will be joined in the presentation by Angus Rhodes, and Angus is the global product manager for Ventiv and has over 30 years experience in delivering client-facing risk and insurance technology solutions for companies like ours. So that's international, large national, public and captive clients, covering all aspects of product and client solution delivery. Angus is now focused on delivering Ventiv's new range of products and consulting with clients on new or existing solutions to maximize value. Angus's area of specialities include diagnostic and maturity models, analytics, ERM, insurance management and captive solutions. And he's presented at numerous industry conferences, including our own Airmic conference. Without further ado, let me hand over to our presenters, and we can get cracking with this Academy session. Thanks.
Thanks, Pat, and good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. I'm imagining a number of you are confined to makeshift workstations, perhaps in bedrooms, kitchens, and such like. So again, thanks for your attendance. In a nutshell, the plan today is to show you how the use of technology can help you achieve effective communication with all of your stakeholders in the risk and insurance community. Now, we devised this fast track session to primarily address those new to the industry, but we recognize that the audience has probably swelled somewhat in the current circumstances, and so hopefully there will be some learning points for everyone that joins us today. Now, to quickly run through the agenda so that you know what we plan to cover, we will start by briefly reminding ourselves of the barriers to effective communication at the corporate level. And guess what, folks? This is a seminar from a tech company, so expect technology to be at the heart of our solution. We will therefore focus on three aspects of different applications of technology that can improve your methods of communication, namely these being digital data capture, analytics, including visualizations, which have now growing importance, and finally, risk and insurance portals. And no doubt we'll have time for questions at the end. What we want to do is to illustrate our thoughts with some examples, and we will also try to keep things topical. Now, just in case you've tuned in today as a diversion from all things COVID, be warned that we will, on a couple of occasions, be using this topic to illustrate how technology can help you communicate with all stakeholders on this subject. So 360 communication challenges. Starting with the current challenges, we assume that for the most part, the audience today are risk and insurance managers. And at Ventiv, we have several hundred clients in this category. And in the vast majority of these, we find huge organizations supported more often than not by small and sometimes very small risk and insurance team. And herein lies the essence of the problem. How do you tackle and keep on top of this communication workload with limited resources? If you're in this position and not supported by appropriate technology, then how many of these following challenges will be familiar to you? For example, inefficient process, perhaps coupled with inappropriate infrastructure, which in turn will lead to a high administrative effort. You may have issues of data chaos caused by management solely in the infrastructure of Excel and Outlook. Other issues may be scalability. If you're working in a small team and your organization generates further workload through mergers and acquisitions and such like, then the problems of scalability and how you can manage that will become an issue. Unreliable and poor quality data is another feature that's common to people without the appropriate infrastructure to manage these communications. And importantly, provision of real-time information. When communicating with all your stakeholders, it's real-time information that will really add benefit to this. So before we go on to look at the solutions to these challenges, let's first consider the breadth of the potential stakeholders with whom you should include when considering what is 360-degree communication. So who are your stakeholders? Now, when people are asked how effective a communicator they are often, or more than not, they are instinctively questioned how effectively they report into their management and executives. Whereas today we want to question how well you provide 360-degree communication. That is in all directions, to all stakeholders, both within your organization internally and externally. So who is it that you communicate with? Depending upon your job role, we guess this might include senior executives. It's often the head office departments such as finance, HR, real estate, health and safety. Potentially also business or regional business operations, in almost local entities as well, and even down to employees at individual sites within your organization. And then there are the external stakeholders, such as suppliers and customers, and maybe members of the public. So this can be a wide and a diverse group. And we can imagine 360 communication in this sense, but it must also be two-way. So we need to consider two-way communication. And we might also instinctively think of the methods by which we communicate received information to stakeholders, rather than methods by which we communicate when trying to obtain information from stakeholders. So it's definitely a two-way thing, not just how you provide information, but how do you capture it as well? So at this point, we need to branch out and consider how technology can address both of these directional flows. Firstly, for information capture, let me explain how this could be supported by the latest data intake tools. And let's consider digital data collection. Now, the traditional approach to collect data via, let's say, Outlook and Excel has its inherent constraints, which many of you will be familiar with. Undeniably, that approach is low cost, but it's also extremely labor intensive, and importantly, it lacks auditability. Risk and insurance managers are reliant.
Sorry, David. I know it's hard when we're virtually disconnected to always come in. Yeah, and I think one of the things to think about those kind of Excel, Outlook, it also creates, and we're going to come on to this a little bit later, it creates little information silos as well, which whether you need to be sharing that information on or doing more advanced analytics, it really hinders you getting most value out of that information you've collected.
Yeah, so certainly risk and insurance managers are reliant upon data to operate successfully. coupled with the fact that many organizations are currently rushing to become more digital. Now, digital intake solutions, they do already exist for the risk and insurance community as well. They enable you to send out SurveyMonkey type questionnaires for any data set and so gather information online rapidly. And the objective of digital data intake is to make information gathering via spreadsheet obsolete. So let's look at this in more detail. So let's consider what the current challenges are for data capture. And it's no secret that the ability to capture and use high quality data is becoming ever more critical in the corporate insurance space. Demand for data is undeniably growing, and most risk and insurance managers face the same problem in that they cannot simply increase the size of their team to meet this additional workload. Some data can be acquired from suppliers, or it may be obtained from group systems such as HR, finance, or real estate. Often, though, one of the best sources of data for risk managers is from field users within their organization. And gathering data from the field using traditional methods can be particularly labor intensive and also a challenge to get accurate and comprehensive data. So what is the solution? So many risk and insurance managers are turning to technology to provide the solution to this problem. Technology providers are developing tools specifically for this purpose, which are powerful, they're versatile, and most importantly, they are easy to use for the end user. They can be used for virtually...
Sorry, David, I probably should put my hand up, shouldn't I? Yeah, and probably one of the things to look at also is just kind of pure time it takes to gather the information. You know, generally, you know, the longer you spend in this period of the time, then the less you actually have in terms of managing information. So if it's a renewal, it'll be less time to actually manage and getting the best renewal terms. For, you know, if it's an incident or an event report, you know, responding it too late can drive the costs of. So I think it's an important element to think about this in the time taken to achieve this intake process.
Yeah, and it's probably just worthwhile considering what are some of the practical examples of digital intake application. Certainly our customers are creating survey type forms to collect all types of risk and insurance data. Some might be annual exercises, typically such as the renewal values data collection used for underwriting submissions. It also might be property surveys, safety inspections, or an audit or assessment. Now, these forms can also be permanently available for field users to complete as and when required, such as, for example, incident or claim notification or a certificate request. A motor accident can, for example, be reported roadside through a digital intake. So they're the examples of where it's used, and it's worth considering how does it work. Well, the technology allows the user to choose how they submit information. It can be via a PC, a computer, via a smartphone or a tablet, including apps. A user providing exposure values or answering certificate requests might prefer to use a computer, whereas a user performing a site inspection would undoubtedly prefer to use digital on a tablet. Users can begin a survey on a mobile device and then complete it on a computer, or vice versa. It's worth remembering that some do not require an active data connection. So a user can, for example, begin completing a form in a remote location or on a plane, for example, and the data will synchronize immediately and automatically when the user is online again. In terms of the user experience, it's important to recognize the whole thing is designed to be user-friendly for the end user. And they'll be completing a servo-style interface that's easy to understand and use. Users have the benefit of being able to upload photos, videos, and audio files and pin locations on a map, even give their signatures on the native apps for mobile devices. I think at this stage, it's probably worth giving an example of what the form looks like, what these intake solutions look like. So if I'll exit here and go into show you. Now I'll log into an example of a digital intake form. Okay, so here we have an example of a renewal questionnaire where it's been set up online. So the user will connect and they will see a nice, clean, user-friendly page laid out where they can, for example, click into each section. They can see what they're required to do. They can navigate easily around the form. Here they can see, well, this is the revenue. Oops, sorry, wrong one. Back to the revenue. Here they can see where we're collecting revenue information. So the user will input this year's information. They'll see last year's information alongside it for variance purposes. So templates exist for all types of data that you wish to collect via renewal. There might be property information, for example. So here you can see the property information will be laid out in a grid, and then the user can complete and update information on their asset as per that.
And all this information would be, for existing information, it will bring down what's currently being tracked, allow the user to update it, obviously put new values in, and then automatically update it back in your central register. So you've got no additional consolidation and aggregation exercises.
Okay, so that was one example there of renewal data collection, so an annual exercise. These can be used, we mentioned vehicle incidents, roadside. Here's an example of a vehicle damage report. So the user whose roadside suffers an accident, they may be logging into the site here. And they will see additional features such as the ability to sketch the incident on the tablet, to add photographs, and to be able to use user-friendly tools like this diagram. Instead of having to write descriptions of where the accident happened, you can put just click on the little diagram, and equally the part of the vehicle will come up to save you having to type that in. So helpful little user-friendly aspects of form completion, all designed to enable you to capture better quality information in a quicker method. So there's an example of the data intake tool, and we're now going back to the digital intake. So the final point on this slide is to really consider what are the benefits of digital. Perhaps one of the most important is that you can use it with rapid deployment and respond to events more quickly. You can certainly improve data accuracy through the controls that are built into these forms, and you can shorten response times with perhaps a greater engagement from your end users. The benefit also that you can connect with an unlimited number of field users and obtain global reach. Doesn't matter where they are in the world, they'll be able to access these forms. And importantly, this type of tool requires no user training. So they should be able to access the form and provide you with information very quickly. So in summary, it enables you to collect event-related data more quickly and accurately than ever before. Another aspect of this is to consider, on the topical note, whether a digital intake solution could help you to manage matters within the current pandemic. And Angus, I don't know if you've got some comments you'd like to make around the potential, where we see the potential for digital in this area.
Yeah, thanks, David. Yeah, I think if you look at it, one of the things that is a typical action is kind of surveying and making assessments. And really where you could use digital here, and we're developing a form to support this, is all around assessing locations' ability for employees to return to work. I think we're all seeing around the globe now that offices haven't been closed due to the government lockdowns. You know, governments are now looking at gradual phased reopening of the economies. And obviously, as companies, you think you have to consider when the right time is for you to reopen your various locations, offices yourselves. So with a very, very simple survey, you can assess each location's readiness for employees to return to work. It gives you kind of a diagnostic score, and then also will make recommendations in terms of, whether it's screenings or distance between desks or having sanitizer or other things available. And so it's a real easy way of doing that kind of a diagnostic check and understand where you are as a company, and also to keep a track of those recommendations as they implement them, and obviously ensure that your employees' safety is being managed. In fact, actually, you can actually look at this from a more broader perspective, so not just from a pandemic approach, but look at diagnostics around supply chain, business interruption, cyber risk, so that as a risk manager, you can get a global view on each of your locations and their sort of risk level, and obviously therefore focus your attention on the locations that have most risk and obviously need most investment and help. Thanks, David.
Yeah, thanks. Okay, so having just focused on data capture from the field, what we shouldn't do is overlook your ability to capture data from other sources and at the same time improve communication with external parties. And one of the undoubted constraints and frustrations of data exchange over the years has been the opportunity for risk managers to efficiently exchange data with suppliers, for example, insurers. Now, the APIs are now something that is relevant in the risk and insurance industry. And as an example here, where at Ventiv, we've worked with some of the suppliers and developed real-time information exchange between the systems that enables huge efficiencies in communication of such events. For example, a significant event occurs on the other side of the world, possibly at a weekend or when your team are not in the office. And the reporting lag could be hours, if not days. Whereas with APIs, all connected parties will be informed at the same time. So a huge improvement in the way data can be communicated between different organizations. So having now covered how to improve your communication with stakeholders when gathering information, we now want to move on to the second technology component for best communication, and that is the provision of information through the use of analytics and in particular visualizations. As alluded to earlier, the second half of the two-way communication is information provision. And we need to recognize that we are certainly in the midst of an exponential growth of available data. Historically, risk and insurance managers were focused on their own data, but possibilities now exist to integrate public and third-party data with your own. For example, you can integrate your own historical incident data with third-party data, such as that for weather, traffic, and census, to deliver much greater insights. With such a wealth of data and information available, senior executives are increasingly demanding concise communication through visualizations to cut through the fog. And the new types of visualizations available can increasingly aid and communicate decision-making. In addition, we've got the integration of AI into risk tools to help you discover trends, patterns, and unknown factors to identify areas for focus and action. As the availability of data increases, the best companies and the best risk and insurance managers will differentiate themselves by their ability to master and communicate it. Now, traditionally, the communication with executives would focus around the provision of fixed reporting formats, maybe in Excel or PowerPoint. They're manually compiled at the last minute and maybe leave a nagging doubt as to its integrity. That thought may resonate with some of you, but it's true that the world over, not just in our sector. Now, whereas enabling your audience to interrogate your data in a live environment is an excellent form of communication, and no doubt gives your executives increased confidence in your operational activity. Now, of course, it's not just your executives that benefit from this type of communication. It's equally relevant to your suppliers. It's important to recognize that these interactive tools are designed these days to enable you to quickly build dashboards that enable you to build stories. You no longer need to be an expert in reporting tools to build interactive dashboards. They should typically take no more than, say, 10 minutes. You can then consider what is the trend or pattern that you wish to highlight in a very quick demonstration to your audience. Explore whether it is specific to certain territories or product lines within your organization. And we believe this approach is sure to create engagement with your stakeholders. Let's just take a moment now to have a look at some examples of these type of interactive dashboards with the visualizations.
So while David's just doing that, yeah, I think Dave brings up some good points. Certainly, there's a huge amount of investment at the moment in new ways to visualize, analyze data. It's pretty well come out of some of the some big data move, and obviously you need the right tool to able to visualize and see the results of that. So whereas in the past we may have seen new reporting analytic changes maybe every other year, we may be seeing 3 or 4 time updates every during a year, and these are bringing up new ways to visualize information, and also even using AI to help decide what the best way is to visualize that information.
Okay, thanks, Angus. So what we're showing you now is an example of an interactive dashboard. Now, the idea here is these were typically used for presentational purposes. So if you want to engage with senior execs or with your suppliers, would be through the use of a dashboard like this. So this is something you would have compiled to tell a story. So for example, we've effectively brought in 1, 2, 3, 4, 7 reports into one page here, but they are all importantly linked together. They're all interactive. So whilst we're looking at this small claims data set, we're looking at a total net incurred of 7.8 million and 153 claims. We can see that it's split by year. Now, if we click on one of these years here, you'll see that everything else on the pages refreshes. So we can then instantly see what the story is from one year to the next. And within these years, we can then also then drill down further. And again, this is where you can be interrogated by people to do benchmarking between, in this case, different regions or different sectors of your business. So it really really produces much greater engagement from your audience when they can see the effect of, say, the claims on certain geographies, or in this case, different causes by gender. So much more engaging experience for the user. And if we may have another example here, similar example, we look from not just the claims point of view, but here we've got
these options really help you discover what's the key drivers or the outliers in a kind of interactive fashion, as David has been showing you.
Yeah. So just to make clear, this can be for any data set, whether risk insurance data. In this example here, we're looking at a safety dashboard and using other visualizations. So here we've got these charts here. But what's interesting is showing here, say, in the word map here, seeing how different, as you go through different locations, we can see what the causes are in that word cloud. Okay, so that's a quick example of the sort of useful tools. What we can also show you are new visualizations. So new visualizations that really help with more advanced analytics, such as, if I'll nip into another example here.
Yeah, while Dave's doing that, just to highlight, this original session was sort of like 3 hours long. So we've really cut it short a little bit in this area. But if you're interested in more examples around some of the analytics, and especially when you're looking at some of the automated predictive analytic components, then obviously we're very happy to follow up after this individually. But we're kind of giving a little taster here only, rather than getting into heavy detail.
Yeah, so I'll just bring up this data set. And Angus, perhaps you might have a few words on the different sort of visualizations that we've got available, the new ones at least, within the advanced analytics. If what I'll do is perhaps I'll go to a new exploration, and then we can perhaps just explore what we've got available. So
yeah. So as we're going through this, I mean, one of the things, you know, we kind of started off with some dashboards you may have built, but actually the tool itself is a whole component on what's called automated predictive analytics, where it will actually look at your data as well, look at the drivers. So the spiral, which I think actually might have been better from your first visual, to be fair. The spiral, what it does is it actually analyzes, thanks David, it actually analyzes all the various, so you ask it a question. So here's the first thing, you can say what drives, in this case, say maybe total paid. That's it, you don't have to be a stats expert or know the technical language. It will then use its natural language processing to go away and try and answer the question. And it looks at a variety of data sets and combination of factors. So it's not like Excel or components where you're just doing a top X. It will look at combinations. You can incorporate external data, whether you can incorporate your own business information, exposure to NatCat, other socioeconomic data. And what it comes up with, and that's the spiral. In the middle is the sort of 100% factor. It's totally driving. But the closer to that middle, it's the best combination factor for that total paid. So I don't know if David hovers in the one right in the middle there. I think he just clicked another, but that really gives you. So actually, what's the result of this is that it's actually doing a bit of its own automated data discovery, and then it identifies that the accent sitting location is the best predictor, and the prediction strength 83%. So the key thing here is, though, you're not doing anything here. You don't have to be a data scientist. You don't have. You're not investing in advanced models. You've got a kind of a sneak in here, and that's doing it all for you, and really allowing you to then start drilling into, well, what might be causing those particular combinations. And you can look at it in a different way. So David, if you click on the next chart down on the left-hand side, it should give you the independency around that as well. So there's a couple of ways of looking at this. And this one, okay, it's a bit of a flat one here that we've got. But what it's doing is it's looking at all the different factors driving the total paid, and the strength of the lines indicates the strength of the relationship. And in fact, you can do similar diagrams to look at other networks of factors. So you could look at your risks and controls in a network, and it will actually identify what's driving the risks most, and then interface it with the events as well. So it's a different way of kind of looking at the relationship between your information. Thanks, David. And I think was one more we're going to have a look at, I think. Or was that back on the slide?
Yeah, it was looking at we had the Sunburst as well. So just showing all the different variations you've got here, but some new ones will also be in the Sunburst here as well.
Yeah, and by the way, one of the things about the tool itself is that it actually looks at the information it's going to present, and actually automatically will pick what it feels is the best visualization. You can obviously change it. Now, to me, I call the Sunburst is a bit like a multi-segment, factored pie chart overlaid. So it allows you to look at more than one factor driving in this case, the total paid, rather than just obviously the pie chart ends up, you just kind of look at one kind of dimension. This allows you to look at 2 or 3 dimensions that may be driving the total paid, and you actually read it out in the ring. So that's kind of how you look at driving it. So each ring ends up being a different factor. So it's kind of an overlaid multiple overlaid pie chart, if that helps you understand what they are.
Yeah, and it's an example of where use of visualizations can help you explain a situation, explain a story better, and create some engagement with your stakeholders.
Okay, yeah, which is why I like the word cloud you used earlier, David. I think the word cloud's a great one in certain situations to really indicate what's driving certain components.
Yeah, I think the other thing we were going to look at here, Angus, is whether on the analytics side, how this can help linking back again to the pandemic. and how risk tools can help you overlay publicly available data with your own risk data through the use of analytics. And what I'll do is I'll go into the...
Yeah, perhaps you can show some of the things we've done here. So there's actually quite a lot of public information available on the pandemic, where there are cases, vulnerability indexes in terms of specific information that specific, economic, employment, and other aspects that can drive the risk. And this, as David said, can all be factored into the analysis you're doing. So David's just getting this information loaded up. And obviously that's really going to help you, certainly in this situations responding to a pandemic. Actually, there was an interesting program I watched on 60 Minutes out of the US, looking at how a Canadian company had actually predicted the pandemic as early as New Year's Eve. Yep, New Year's Eve. They were monitoring globally reports of illnesses, and then used that, and then you combine that with flight data and mobiles that were in sorry, I pronounced that incorrectly, apologies, in China. We'll keep that simple, and looking at where they'd flown, where the mobiles had moved since, to give a diagnostic of which cities were most at risk. So that shows you the kind of power when you kind of start combining external data sources and what you can actually achieve with it. Certainly way beyond what you can easily achieve yourself. Okay, David, we nearly there. I know your internet down there. I'm not sure quite where you are actually. Isn't quite always as good as it is in the office, for sure.
Yeah, it's temporary. We're about attempting there to load where the coded data sits over your own data, but we won't worry. Let's go back to where we were. So we covered off the interactive analytics. We spoke about the new visualizations that are available, and also about the pandemic. Now, portals, the third technology component that can facilitate your 360-degree communication is the use of risk portals. So let's ask for the moment, what does the risk management community mean by a portal? Well, the IT advisory firm Gartner have provided a definition for us, which is no doubt a technically correct way of putting it. But on the other hand, there's my definition, which is hopefully more digestible. And that is, for in the risk management community, a portal is a user-friendly online website or gateway for all stakeholders to communicate with you. And importantly, from the two-way aspect, both providing and receiving information in real time. So with a portal, you can not only capture information, i.e. through digital intake, but also provide information, e.g. through visualizations, through a single interface. And at Ventiv, we recognize the growing importance of portals to the risk management community, and we are planning to introduce a new one this year. In addition to the data intake and analytics, we see this as a great opportunity for risk and insurance managers to store and share content within a portal, and so enhance collaboration with all stakeholders, and at the same time working within the constraints of being a small team in a huge organization. So our final slide before questions is to recap, and we propose that you take away these three technical components that will help you in establishing a digital highway between all of your stakeholders, and so ease and facilitate effective two-way 360-degree communication. So thank you to everyone who was able to join the webinar today, and over to you, Pat.
Lovely. Thank you very much indeed, guys. Very comprehensive and very clear. I think one of the things I would say before we dive into the questions is that the current health crisis and pandemic has for sure highlighted and continues to highlight the benefit and importance of good risk management And I think there is an opportunity for risk and insurance managers to actually emerge once again as being a really important resource in your own corporations. And often we find that significant risks as they crystallize are the things that promote the value of the people who are working in risk and insurance. So I think it's a great opportunity for all risk and insurance managers to think about, do they have the right kind of armory to really press home their advantage of looking after things that are so fundamentally important for their corporations. So I think this session is timely. I've got a couple of questions that have come through from our audience today. So before I cover off a few of my observations, the first is hopefully quite a quick question, but many of the people in our audience today work for multinational international organizations. Is this a global application, or is it mainly for UK based businesses?
Yeah, I'll pick that one up. Thanks, Pat. It's certainly applicable to all, really. It has, because of the scalability of the solution and its design, it's intended to be used for multinationals. So, for example, the fact that the system will be multi-language, multi-currency, will enable it to be used anywhere. And with the technology sitting behind it, the idea is it can be used on the move, on mobile, on desktop. So most definitely is a global application, certainly.
Yeah, just to add to that, David, just if you look at like the event reporting, that perhaps in particular, I think we've certainly, in my 30 years, I've seen English becomes a very established business language, but obviously if you're logging events, you really need to be able to support the local language. And that's certainly with digital, it's one of the things that we see as one of its key advantages, that it can have those kind of local language forms, going into a sort of a corporate, often English language system.
Great. Okay, so it sounds as though it's these kinds of technologies are very much geared up for multinational risk managers and their companies. So that's good to know. The other thing, or the question that's been raised, and I'll sort of reframe it slightly. I note through the presentation that there's been no mention of blockchain. So is it correct that the use of blockchain technology is not something on the immediate path for this kind of technology?
David, would you like me to take that one?
I'd love you to, Angus.
Yeah. So, in terms of blockchain, I mean that's certainly interesting question, and certainly I think for the topics we've covered today, I think it's not necessarily the technology we most seeing being applying. What we've seen a definite rise in is all around sort of artificial intelligence, which I'll come to shortly. In terms of blockchain, I think where we're really going to start seeing the application of that is in the sort of establishment of contracts between, so the underwriter and the insured, and having automated ways that they then get paid out under certain circumstances. I mean, perhaps for the layman, the best example I can think of, which may explain how it can be used, is a bit like the concert tickets we all buy, that it would then be able to trace exactly who bought it originally, and as you pass it around, we'll have controls to kind of eliminate that the touts, as we all know it, but that the ticket itself would know where it started off and where it's been. So that's probably one example I see of blockchain. In terms of what we're looking at, I think it's really artificial intelligence that we really see helping the risk manager, both in terms of simplifying their ability to ask questions to these analytics, presenting better visualizations, and also doing the automated predictive analytics, where it's really pulling in information from more than one source to really tease out the key drivers of that particular aspect.
Great. Well, I think it's really valuable when thinking about new technology to know what it is and know what it isn't, but also know how it might move forward in in the future. So thanks for that answer. The last question that's come across that I just want to verify with you is, if you have a new business who wants to implement this kind of technology, typically how long does it take from, if you like, the sort of go live to the or the approval to the go live of the system? Typically, how long is an implementation?
Yeah, it's a good question. I would say certainly we recognise that for the most part, risk and insurance teams do have a small resource. So we recognise that when planning and designing an implementation, and we would say on average, let's say about 6 months would be a reasonable amount of time to allow from initial contact to go live of the system. And we do support, as a modular system, we would support a phased approach to implementation. So don't try and do too much at once. Implement part of the system. Once it's proven, then it can be built out in the future.
Right. So you advocate a phased approach to implementation.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah, and I think if I was to sort of endorse that from a user perspective, the key to all these technologies is sort of embedding the use of them throughout the organization. And often you find a phased approach is the best way to embed as you go, because you get your early adopters and you get your, outside of the risk and insurance team, the other stakeholders becoming increasingly used to how to use this kind of technology. So
yeah, and I think obviously the important thing before you begin is obviously establishing your clear objectives and outcomes, your sort of success criteria, and what are your kind of key requirements, prioritized to meet your sort of business outcomes and successes. So I think with that clear, that can help drive the phasing, and obviously keeps a good focus on the project as well.
Lovely, brilliant. Well, thank you very much for that. I think that's all the questions that have come from the audience. So thank you very much. I've just got a few final observations before we sign off. The first is that the whole premise of today's session has been around communication via technology, and I think the opportunity for Airmic members around your stakeholders and the people in your business being ready for this kind of technology has never been stronger, because as companies navigate themselves through this current working from home pandemic, increasingly people of all sorts of age and experience are getting more and more used to obviously webinars and Zoom and GoToMeetings, but also the use of sharing platforms, which effectively is one of the advantages of the technology we've been hearing about today. So things like SharePoint and Teams and Google, and obviously this technology is very bespoke to risk and insurance. So I think the timing of having great technology accepted in businesses as a tool of trade, I don't think there's been a better time to do it. So that's observation number one. I think the other piece I see around technologies of this type, or its real strength, hinges on combining the quality of the messaging that the system outputs, the timeliness, and also the relevance. And really, the quality of messaging, timeliness, and relevance really equals value from the perception of the user. So I think that used correctly, technologies of this type, and especially through visualization. So my experience as a veteran of insurance and risk reports to boards is I lovingly prepare my 45 pages, safe in the knowledge that I'll be lucky if anybody reads past the exec summary. And I think to a certain degree, smart visualization is a great way of capturing in a very kind of comforting way the key messages and key stats, key numbers, and the key things that senior management really do need to know. And of course, there'll always be the backup, which is more the province of the risk and insurance manager. So I think the adage that, you know, a picture can speak 1,000 words is probably never truer. It's reassuring to know that there are technologies that can create great visualization to go along with the story. I think the other strength really around risk information, and I'm sort of dotted lining to the Insurance Act, is technologies of this sort create, if you like, the one version of the truth. And you know, I think we can all imagine, you know, the version control that you get in normal processes that don't use sharing capabilities, you know, can be a challenge when our obligation is to understand our risks and communicate them effectively to our brokers and or our insurers. And you know, I think that leads to a particular, I'm thinking about what the business case might look like for an investment such as this, and I think the added efficiency, and this is very much aligned to sort of parallel and agile working on multiple topics within the world of insurance and risk, rather than a purely sort of sequential activity. And you know, I think my last point is, particularly looking at the kind of outputs and the dashboarding, is this does enable risk and insurance management and their outcomes, you know, to really influence strategy and business plans. And you know, for many organizations, and certainly for their risk and insurance managers, kind of drawing that line between risk and strategy is key critical. And you know, one of my observations is I can see how a technology like this might help those objectives. So I think that they're my final remarks. I think the last thing I wanted to say to Airmic members is obviously the number of quantity and breadth of learning and development opportunities, you know, has been widened as we enter this new kind of virtual delivery mechanisms. So keep your eyes peeled on the airmic.com website for upcoming sessions. This session will be recorded and will be shared, and the slides will be uploaded to the Airmic website. So all of the resources and today's collateral will be available to you. So the last thing for me to say is thank you very much for attending. And thank you very much indeed to David and Angus of Ventiv for their presentation and everything that they've shared with us. So with that, thank you very much, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.